Welcome to our channel. Today we're exploring the incredible life and career of Bobby Bare, a trailblazing country music legend whose songs and storytelling left an indelible mark on the industry. From his humble beginnings in Ohio to becoming a Grammy-winning artist and a member of the Country Music Hall of Fame, Bobby Bare's journey is one of perseverance, talent, and resilience. Join us as we delve into the highlights, challenges, and enduring legacy of this remarkable musician. Bobby Bare was born Robert Joseph Bare Sr. on April 7, 1935, in Ironton, Ohio. Growing up in a small industrial town on the Ohio River, he experienced firsthand the tough realities of working-class life. Ironton had a long history tied to iron smelting and railroads, and there was always that no-nonsense spirit in places like that. People worked hard, took their music seriously, and found ways to appreciate life despite the day-to-day grind. In his early years, Bobby tried repeatedly to sell his original compositions, but the music business wasn't exactly open-armed to new talent, even less so to someone who was unconnected and had to rely purely on hustle. He got used to rejection, but he always kept at it, convinced that his songs were worth recording. He eventually landed a record deal with Capitol Records in the late 1950s, cutting a few rock and roll singles. This was the era where rockabilly and early rock were starting to rub shoulders with mainstream pop and country, and a lot of artists, even the future kings of country, were dabbling in the new style to see if they could catch fire. But in Bobby's case, none of those singles really took off. Just before he was drafted into the Army, Bobby wrote a track called The All-American Boy, cutting a demo for a friend of his named Bill Parsons. The plan was for Parsons to learn how to record it properly. Instead, Fraternity Records wound up using Bobby's demo as the official version. The weird twist? They credited Bill Parsons on the label, not Bobby Bare, and so the single soared to number 1, 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, but the performer credited was someone else. Fraternity's error became one of those legendary mistakes in music history, but it did get Bobby's voice out there. That same track hit number 1, 22 in the UK singles chart in April 1959, also credited to Bill Parsons. After that, the Army claimed him. While he was serving, presumably with less time to focus on music, the record industry kept marching on. By the time he got out, Bobby found he needed another foothold to keep going. He persevered through the early 60s, which was a time of massive change in popular music. Rock and roll was in full swing, country was evolving with the Nashville sound, and folk music was also on the rise. Around 1962, he got his real break in the country genre when Chet Atkins, a legendary guitarist and producer, signed him to RCA Victor. Now, this was no small deal. Chet Atkins was one of the architects of the polished, radio-friendly Nashville sound, known for layering country with string sections and background vocals to cross over to the pop charts. He recognized that Bobby Bare had a distinctive voice and presence that could do well in that setting. So Bobby's debut single for RCA was Shame on Me. Not exactly a blockbuster, but it got some airplay, made a little splash, and announced that a new voice was on the scene. Then came Detroit City, which reached number 1, 6 on the country chart, and actually climbed to number 16 on the pop chart. Released in 1963, Detroit City struck a chord with listeners, especially those who had left their rural towns for industrial jobs in places like Detroit, only to find themselves feeling lonely or homesick. There was a real resonance in that storyline, and it earned Bobby a Grammy Award in 1964 for Best Country and Western Recording. That was a pretty huge validation of his transition from those early missteps to real mainstream success. Once Bobby had that momentum, a surge of hits followed. One highlight was 500 Miles Away from Home, based on a folk ballad by Hetty West, simply known as 500 Miles. By adapting it into a country style, Bobby tapped into that same sense of distance and longing. Then he recorded Ian Tyson's Four Strong Winds, which also brought in a broader folk sensibility that was starting to become mainstream in the mid-1960s. He kept exploring material that spoke to restlessness, wandering, and emotional authenticity, cornerstones of good country music. By 1965, he'd piled up enough hits and good reputation to receive multiple Grammy nominations. Four Strong Winds itself got nods for Best Country and Western Vocal Performance and Best Country and Western Single. In 1966, he snagged another nomination, this time for Talk Me Some Sense, in the Best Country and Western Male Vocal Performance category. People clearly recognized that Bobby had the capacity to deliver ballads with sincerity, as well as more rollicking tunes that displayed his sense of humor and down-home charm. He recorded 2 duet albums with Skeeter Davis, herself a Grand Ole Opry member, known for hits like The End of the World, and even did 6 tracks as a trio with Norma Jean and Liz Anderson. One of those tracks, The Game of Triangles, was all about a wife-husband-other-woman drama that soared to number 1, 5 on the Billboard chart, and earned the trio yet another Grammy nomination. He would team up with women, with new composers, with old pros, whoever could bring something interesting to the table. In 1968, he recorded an album with a British group called the Hillsiders. Now, British country fans might seem like an odd niche, but country music has a surprising fan base all around the world, including the UK. The Hillsiders were known for being one of the country acts that emerged in England. Moving into 1969, he scored a top 5 country hit with Tom T. Hall's The Lincoln Park Inn, a somewhat provocative tune for the times, dealing with infidelity and moral dilemmas. Tom T. Hall, nicknamed the Storyteller, wrote songs that often had deeper narratives, and Bobby's warm, reflective style made him a natural fit for that material. But as the 60s wrapped up and the 70s approached, Bobby decided it was time for a change, leaving RCA for Mercury Records in 1970. That move paid off immediately with How I Got to Memphis, which soared into the top 3 on the country chart. Written by Tom T. Hall as well, the track told a story about a man traveling to Memphis to find a lost love, brimming with that sense of yearning that Bobby delivered so well. At Mercury, he also scored 2 more top 10 hits with early Chris Christopherson compositions, Come Sundown and Please Don't Tell Me How the Story Ends, both in 1971. During that period, Christopherson was emerging as one of the best songwriters in country, bridging country, folk, and even a bit of rock sensibility. He also tried his hand at Shel Silverstein's Sylvia's Mother, originally a pop hit by Dr. Hook and The Medicine Show. Bobby's version reached number 12 in 1972. Shel Silverstein, of course, was a multi-talented writer known for children's books like Where the Sidewalk Ends, as well as for writing edgy, witty songs. This would prove important later on because Silverstein became a key collaborator with Bobby. After a couple of years at Mercury, Bobby decided to return to RCA in 1973. Once back there, he recorded Billy Joe Shaver's Ride Me Down Easy, which nearly cracked the top 10. Billy Joe Shaver was an outlaw country figure, writing raw, authentic songs that guys like Waylon Jennings championed. At this point, Bobby Bare got more experimental, starting to record novelty songs in front of live audiences. One example is Marie Laveau, which soared to the top of the country chart in 1974. It was co-written by Shel Silverstein and Baxter Taylor. Marie Laveau was a bit of a quirky track about the legendary New Orleans voodoo queen, which gave it a fun, eerie vibe, and it ended up being Bobby's only #1 country hit. Sometimes people are surprised that he had only one #1, given his extensive chart history, but that's how it goes in country. Many beloved artists hover around the top 10 or 20 for ages, but only occasionally land that top slot. Marie Laveau happened to be Bobby's golden ticket to #1, and it earned a BMI award in 1975. Around 1977, he recorded an entire album of Bob McDill songs called Me and McDill, featuring the track Look Who I'm Cheatin' On Tonight. McDill was another notable songwriter who penned hits for Don Williams and others, known for his insightful approach to country lyrics. Shel Silverstein, meanwhile, wrote more songs for Bobby, including a big crowd favorite, Daddy What If, which Bobby sang as a duet with his 5-year-old son, Bobby Bare Jr. That track soared to #1, 2 on the country charts, and nearly cracked the top 40 on the pop side, reflecting the era's openness to mixing adult and child voices in heartwarming narratives. This kind of father-child collaboration was unusual enough to draw attention, and it served as one more example of how Bobby Bare didn't mind coloring outside the lines. The album that featured that track, Bobby Bare Sings Lullabies, Legends, and Lies, became his most commercially successful release. Radio stations beyond country, adult contemporary pop college radio, picked it up, broadening his fan base. All 14 songs on that album were written or co-written by Silverstein, and the combination of Shel's whimsical, heartfelt writing and Bobby's accessible voice made for a serious winner. Interestingly, even though that album brought him a new wave of success, it was also near the end of his string of top 10 hits. In 1975, Bobby took a deeper dive into the children's genre by recording Singin' in the Kitchen with his family, mostly featuring Shel Silverstein compositions as well. That album was even nominated in the Best Group category at the Grammys. It says a lot about Bobby's range that he could move from more adult-oriented songs like Marie Laveau to a family-friendly album that's basically lullabies and sing-alongs. His hits in the mid-1970s included Alimony, The Winner, and Drop Kick Me Jesus, Through the Goalposts of Life, a track that combined Christian themes with football imagery. Only in country music could you have a waltz that references Jesus and goalposts. That particular tune got a 1976 Grammy nomination for Best Country Song. Bobby's sense of humor and willingness to handle unusual material always set him apart. In 1977, he released Redneck Hippie Romance in Vegas, the latter being a duet with his wife, Jeannie. Though these songs may not have dominated the charts, they show how he kept looking for fresh angles. By 1978, Bobby was ready for another label change, moving this time to Columbia Records. He scored a near top 10 hit with Sleep Tight Goodnight Man that same year. Even as the mainstream country scene was veering more into pop crossovers, Bobby managed to balance critical praise with decent commercial performance. Albums like Bear, 1978, and Sleeper Wherever I Fall, 1979, earned respect from reviewers for the sincerity of his interpretations and the range of his song choices. In 1979, Bobby teamed up with Rosanne Cash, who was at the start of her own very distinguished career, for a duet called No Memories Hangin' Round, which made it into the top 20. That was a big stepping stone for Rosanne Cash, and Bobby's support might have given her a bit of a boost. Around 1980, Bobby almost cracked the top 10 with Numbers off the album Down and Dirty. At that point, he was branching a bit towards Southern rock influences, which you can hear in some of the guitar tones and production approaches on that album. He followed up with Drunk and Crazy, 1980, continuing in that more rocking, raucous style. This pivot to Southern rock might not have dominated the country charts the way more traditional or pop-oriented country was doing. but it illustrated Bobby's refusal to stay in a safe, predictable lane. Next came As Is, 1981. Produced by Rodney Crowell, a talented songwriter and musician known for bridging the gap between classic and modern country, that album included the single New Cut Road, and while it didn't light up the charts, it was another solid piece of work. Bobby's chart performances in the early 1980s were still respectable. In 1983, he teamed up with Lacey J. Dalton for It's a Dirty Job, hitting the top 30, and later that year, he had another single, The Jogger, which also made the top 30. He recorded Used Cars for the film of the same name, a comedic Kurt Russell vehicle from 1980. Though it wasn't a massive success, it did tie him to an interesting project outside of strictly country circles. Bobby's also had a small film and TV career. He starred in a Western called A Distant Trumpet, 1964, alongside Troy Donahue, where he had a memorable scene involving being branded for desertion, which must have been shocking to see. He also appeared in a few episodes of No Time for Sergeants, but in the end, he put Hollywood on the back burner, feeling that focusing on his music was the better path. From 1983 to 1988, Bobby hosted Bobby Bare and Friends on the Nashville Network, TNN. This show was a real treat for fans of songwriting because it featured Bobby interviewing songwriters who then performed their hits. Bobby's relaxed style as a host made the show welcoming, and it fit with the country tradition of celebrating the craft behind the hits. In 1985, Bobby signed with EMI America Records. Nonetheless, he kept performing and writing, never losing his sense of humor or the plain-spoken sincerity that was always his trademark. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the radio landscape was changing. The so-called new traditionalists like Randy Travis and George Strait were rising, and soon after that, the Garth Brooks wave of arena country was on the horizon. Bobby didn't chase these trends. Instead, he picked his spots, focusing on smaller projects or collaborations that interested him. In 1998, he formed the band Old Dogs with Jerry Reed, Mel Tillis, and Waylon Jennings. This group was a sort of supergroup of older country legends who still had a lot of spark. They did some fun recordings that showcased their collective sense of humor, with Shel Silverstein contributing songs, once again weaving the threads of that long-standing partnership. Sadly, Jerry Reed, Mel Tillis, and Waylon Jennings have all passed on. In 2005, after about 2 decades without any new studio albums, Bobby released The Moon Was Blue, produced by his son, Bobby Bare Jr. Jr. is also a musician, though his style leans more toward indie rock and alternative country. This father-son collaboration intrigued critics. Seeing a legend like Bobby Bare Sr. working with the next generation, bridging old and new approaches, was captivating. The album got respectful reviews, and it demonstrated that Bobby wasn't ready to just call it quits. 2012 brought an unexpected twist. Bobby teamed up with Petter Ian in Norway's Melodi Grand Prix, the competition to select Norway's entry for the Eurovision Song Contest. Eurovision might seem worlds away from the Grand Ole Opry, but Bobby jumped in with Things Change, making it all the way to the Norwegian final, where they finished third. Eurovision is known for flamboyant pop and wild stage shows, yet here was Bobby Bare, a country icon from Ohio, stepping onto that stage for Norway. Even though they didn't win, it was a cool cross-continental moment. That same year, in 2012, Bobby recorded a duet with Jamie Johnson on the album Living for a Song, a tribute to Hank Cochran. They sang I'd Fight the World, demonstrating Bobby's ability to still hold his own next to contemporary artists. Jamie Johnson was and still is famous for revering traditional country, so pairing him with Bobby was a natural match. Then in 2013, the Country Music Association announced that Bobby would be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. He joined cowboy Jack Clement and Kenny Rogers in that year's class, and it was a long overdue honor. Interestingly, Bobby had once been a member of the Grand Ole Opry, going back to the 1960s, but over time, he drifted away. On April 7, 2018, his birthday, Garth Brooks surprised him by reinstating him as a member of the Opry. He married his wife, Jeannie, and they've been together for decades, which is no small feat in show business. Their duet Vegas is a playful testament to their bond. Meanwhile, raising Bobby Bare Jr. in a household brimming with music clearly had an influence on his son's path. When The Moon Was Blue arrived in 2005, critics were intrigued that Bobby Bare Sr. was stepping back into the studio after such a long hiatus, and with his son in the producer's chair. Bobby Bare Jr. had built a name in indie rock circles, sometimes playing with a raw, edgy sound quite different from mainstream country. But father and son found common ground in the emotional honesty of the songs. In interviews, Jr. talked about how his dad gave him creative leeway, not insisting on controlling the production approach or leaning too heavily on tradition. Bobby Bare's life and career exemplify the heart and soul of country music. His timeless songs, groundbreaking achievements, and unwavering passion for storytelling have inspired generations of fans and musicians alike. Though his health may be declining, his legacy remains vibrant, reminding us of his immense contributions to the world of music. If you enjoyed this tribute to Bobby Bare, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories about country music's greatest legends. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.